Crazy comparison today, guys. We got a 2024 718 Cayman GT4 RS against a 2020 718 Cayman GT4 that has been modified out here at Chuckwalla. The last time I was out here at Chuckwalla was almost 2 years ago, and I spent just one day here with my GR86. It was part of the free track day that comes with your GR86 purchase. And for that reason, don't expect a particularly well-driven lap or a fast lap time, but I'll tell you how these two cars drive. And big shout out to Tamale Track Days, who's hosting this event. This was actually their first ever track day, and truly a pleasure because their philosophy is they want intermediate and advanced drivers. They don't actually cater to beginners, and you have very few cars on track such that you don't have any traffic and you can set your hot laps without interruption. It's a beautiful thing, very well organized and well executed. Use the link down in the description if you guys want a free t-shirt with your upcoming Tamale Track Day. We're going to start with the Cayman GT4 RS as the baseline. Keep in mind, neither of these cars are stock. Full mod list as always down in the description. We have 19-inch Forgeline wheels with the brand new Hoosier Track Attack Pro tires, 200 tread wear, and 265 section width in the front, 305 section width in the rear, which is the exact same tire compound and tire size of the Cayman GT4 that we're going to be driving next. We have a Fabspeed valved exhaust, 991.2 GT3 RS calipers for front brakes with Essex J-hook rotors and Ferodo 1.11 pads. Rear brakes are also 991.2 GT3 RS calipers with OEM rotors and OEM pads. We have some camber plates front and rear and stock dampers, although some other supporting suspension mods as well, and negative 3.4 degrees of camber up front and negative 2.8 in the rear. Alright, first impressions with the Cayman GT4 RS is that it is razor sharp on the track. We've reviewed this previously on the street and it's very impressive there. Really comes alive on track because it feels so at home. Everything is so sharp and precise. The PDK is immediate, it is flawless. Millimeter and millisecond precision there. The steering it's an E-Pass, as it is with all 718 Caymans, and it is so precise that there is no slop, no lag at all between your input and what the front wheels are doing. Now here with a hot off-camber turn and into this low-speed right-hander, do get a bit of understeer, so you're going to experience the McPherson strut limitations even by dialing in a ton of camber, again negative 3.4 in the front. But this car is magnificent to drive on track. It is so easy to push hard, and this is actually the first session. The first session I think I was out there for about 14, not even 15 minutes, including warm-up laps and cool down, and pretty early on you're able to push the car hard, and the way that it communicates with you, the E-Pass steering, very precise, very sharp. It has a good amount of feedback actually for E-Pass, and part of that is that everything in the suspension is so race car, right? You have these spherical bushings on the lower control arms, and it really tightens things up. We're shaving off time, lap after lap, which is funny because I think this lap right now, I end up doing about a 155.5. And before driving, I did a sighting lap with the owner, Nick. Since, again, I hadn't been here in almost 2 years, so I wanted to just get a feel for the track again before I started driving it. And riding passenger was so scary because it always feels faster when you're in the passenger seat. And right here at the end of the straight, I remember feeling like, oh my god, we're going off the road, this guy has a death wish. And then you brake and turn and the car handles it. And it happens a couple times on this track where at the end of the straight, there we go, a little bit of correction there, because the car is lively. You can get it to play with you if you want, and you're not afraid of it biting, so you can push it at these low speed corners and correct it the way you need without any drama, without any fuss. Anyway, the owner in the first session when I was riding passenger with him was also doing around a 155.5, and I thought I was going to die. And then you end up in the driver's seat doing the same time, and it feels feels totally normal for the car. So just funny how perceptions change driver versus passenger seat. The owner actually is quite a quick driver. He ended up doing 153s, I think, later in the day. Again, as you're going to see, I'm occasionally having to correct, but it is so natural and predictable. It's not one of those mid-engine cars like a Lotus Elise that when it bites you, it can bite you hard, right? The Cayman is so progressive and so easy, especially for a mid-engine car. Now we're back at 155.5, which again, I don't want you to focus on the lap times here because the actual pace for this car is several seconds quicker than this. The first thing I thought of when driving this was how it compares to a 991.2 GT3. We did a track review of that recently, and the 991.2, that's when they still had McPherson strut front suspension. The 992 has double wishbone. And the Cayman, on the other hand, has strut in all four corners. The Cayman is still a far more balanced car, even though it has the technically inferior suspension geometry, because the front to rear balance is 45-55, and it's so predictable, so easy. Whereas in the 991.2 GT3, you feel that engine weight being further rearward, and trail braking, it tends to rotate quite a bit more, and you are afraid of it biting more so than the Cayman. It's still incredibly fun, and the PDK there is also very sharp. Almost as sharp and as instantaneous as this. It's very close, splitting hairs. But that vehicle doesn't feel quite as balanced front to rear, in the sense that you can't push it right on lap 1 or lap 2 at 9/10. The Cayman you can. The 991.2 GT3, it's going to take you a couple laps and you want to work up to it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is a car that requires a little bit more from the driver, whereas the Cayman, you really need to be driving like an idiot to get in trouble driving a Cayman GT4 RS. Also, with these carbon intakes, the engine note is intoxicating, and I'm so grateful that we finally have a GT3 engine, a proper engine in the Cayman chassis, letting that thing scream all the way up to 9,000 RPM. Just on the lower speed corners, you will notice that strut limitation. These are off camber. Can't really fault it for that, but here, not able to get on the power as early as you might think. But really such a capable car, and set up quite well by the owner for track work. Really incredible vehicle on track. It's so sharp. The PDK, even in automatic, is flawless. I just sometimes occasionally will manually downshift, but I actually prefer that over being in fully manual mode, because it's going to handle the upshifts perfectly every time, and then I can assist with the downshifts. PDK Sport has them on, stability traction off. Car is very easy to control at the limit, that Cayman mid-engine balance. It does have struts in all four corners, and you do feel that limitation when you start pushing it on a lot of low-speed corners like this one right here. And then not this right and not the left, but turn 10, the right hand right after that. I mean, here, of course, it's off camber, so you're going to expect things are going to be a little bit funky. You're not going to really... You can't really comment on the car's balance as accurately there, whereas here, you should be able to get on the throttle earlier than what this car allows you to do. But I think that's just a limitation of the strut front suspension. They were actually adjusting this in the morning to dial out some of that understeer at the lower corners, but it's still there. And some of that's going to be tuning, but part of that's also just the geometry limitations of strut suspension. And again, it's all four corners, not just in the rear. Oh, overall, incredibly capable, confidence inspiring, awesome car to drive on track. These modern RS vehicles, you just can push lap after lap after lap, and there's no drama, no fuss. So brilliantly engineered. Now with this as the baseline, let's see how it compares to that modified manual Cayman GT4. Now the Cayman GT4 again is running the same Track Attack Pro's 265/305 front to rear section width, wrapped around Apex VS 5RS wheels. We have negative 3.2 degrees of front camber and negative 2.7 in the rear. We've got JCR headers, a catted OAP with titanium race pipes, and an M Engineering tune. We've got dive planes and a wing, numeric shifter, and cables. Again, full mod list down in the description. Just keep in mind that the coilovers here, the Manti Racing 3-way suspension, is based on the KW 3-way coilovers that is stiffer than stock, but is softer than the GT4 RS. And key here is that the lower control arms on the GT4, they have rubber bushings, whereas you have spherical bushings on the GT4 RS. And that's stock from factory. Thought I had that adjusted. Now keep in mind, track times here, again, to not be focused on, because this is actually several hours later in the day. It's much hotter. I'm fatigued, the car's hot, and I'm definitely going slower after the warm-up lap here compared to the GT4 RS, although I do also think the GT4 RS is going to be faster around a track. Here the GT4 is making more power than a stock GT4, but still not as much as a GT4 RS. GT4, this sounds really good. The mods the owner has made, it's not quite the induction note of the GT4 RS, but this sounds way better than a regular GT4. Just listen to that thing. You have a pedal spacer? Shouldn't. I was having some issues with the heel toe rev match where it was acting a bit funky.
On the clutch? What are you asking?
Do you have a pedal spacer?
No.
On?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just use that.
The GT4 has the brake pedals too close.
Got it.
Heel toe.
It feels very unnatural to not heel toe on downshifts with the manual. Here compared to the RS, the front end is just not even close to as sharp. It's still very sharp, but it's still very immediate and responsive. Not quite the same level of feedback and immediacy and sharpness of the front end though of the RS, and I think a big part of that is going to be the spherical bushings and possibly even E-Pass tuning. That's not to say that this doesn't have a great front end or that this isn't a sharp car, but when you're comparing it to an RS, it's all varying shades on the scale. I'm also having some issues with the manual transmission on downshifts, which is adding a bit to the learning curve. This is my second session on this track after 2 years. So I'm actually missing the PDK because the PDK allowed me to really focus on just driving and understanding the track and the car. The gearing here is also quite long. Short shifting a little bit there into fourth. As someone who is generally a manual transmission purist, I do find myself actually preferring the PDK RS experience here because those shifts are just flawless, immediate, and allow you to focus on driving without worrying about shifting, which again is probably my preference simply because I don't feel fully comfortable on the track. But if you take me to a track that I have more experience, something like Spring Mountain as an example, then I likely would feel different. also feel a bit long. The RS it has this crazy surgical precision with all of the inputs, such sharpness, and I know it's cliche, but hey, I can say that I actually did surgery. The GT4 here is a step or two down, which doesn't actually detract from the driving experience. It's still very pleasant to drive. You just don't have the same level of immediacy with all the inputs. And because I wasn't pushing this car quite as hard as I did with the GT4 RS, again, it was later in the day and much hotter, and you're gonna find that I'm not pushing the car to the point where I need to correct for small amounts of oversteer. I'm not finding that limit of the McPherson strut quite as readily either, and I think that's more just I wasn't comfortable pushing the car as hard when it was later in the day and a lot hotter, and I was also feeling a little bit fatigued. Of course, both cars are far more similar than different. You still have that beautiful Cayman mid-engine balance, very easy to understand what the car is doing, to feel it with your butt. And the communication through the wheel for E-Pass is fine, but not quite as much feedback as in that RS. Also 1,000 RPM less with the GT4 engine versus the GT4 RS. That these two left-handers here can be taken as one single motion rather than two separate turns. So it looks like I was finally relearning that line, I should say, later in the day. Understeer right there. Again, same limitation between these cars with that McPherson strut in all four corners. My friends, I'm curious to hear what you think of the GT4 versus the GT4 RS. It's great that those who want a GT4 have two options. You can go manual with a regular GT4, or if you want PDK and you have the extra cash for it too, you can go with the RS. Both fantastic options.
Gonna cool down.
I was like, we didn't even do a proper hot lap before cooling down. And while I do still think this car is going to be a little bit slower than that GT4 RS around a track, it's not that far off.
I don't know what Nick has.
This thing's fucking dialed though, man.
Feel good?
It feels great. I mean, the front end isn't quite as sharp as the RS, and I think part of that might be like the spherical bushings versus rubber. But this feels really fucking good, dude.
Again, if you guys want to run with Tamale Track Days, use the link in the description to get a free t-shirt with your upcoming track day. Let me know your thoughts between the GT4 and the GT4 RS. Much love, and I'll see you all in that next one.